Well, folks, he's back. The man who never really left the spotlight is once again making headlines. Like a bad penny, Donald J. Trump is once again demanding attention on the world stage. His return is as controversial as ever, stirring up emotions and debates across the globe. This time, he's decided that he, and only he, can solve the ongoing tragedy in Ukraine. With a self-assured demeanor, he claims to have the ultimate solution to bring peace to the war-torn region. That's right, folks, the man who thinks windmills cause cancer is now a self-proclaimed expert in international diplomacy. His bold statements and grandiose plans are as audacious as ever. Who needs experience or knowledge when you've got Trump? His confidence is unwavering, and his supporters are as fervent as ever, rallying behind his every word. This is the man who, during his presidency, cozied up to Putin, even siding with him over his own intelligence agencies. His controversial relationships with world leaders have always been a point of contention. This is the man who was impeached for trying to pressure Ukraine into digging up dirt on his political rival Joe Biden. But hey, details. Trump thrives on chaos. His impeachment trials and legal battles have only added to his notoriety. He loves inserting himself into a crisis and proclaiming himself the only one who can fix it. His larger-than-life persona and dramatic flair make him a magnet for media attention. It's all part of his brand. The strongman, the dealmaker, the savior of the free world. His image is carefully crafted to portray him as the ultimate problem solver, and while most of us see him for the bloviating, self-serving charlatan he is, there's a scary number of people who actually buy into his shtick. His rallies are filled with passionate supporters who hang on his every word. Buckle up, folks, it's going to be a bumpy ride. With Trump back in the spotlight, the political landscape is sure to be as turbulent and unpredictable as ever. So what exactly is Trump's grand plan to end the war in Ukraine? Well, if you can call it a plan, that is. It's more like a half-baked casserole of threats, boasts, and vague promises. The gist of it seems to be this. Trump reckons he can bully Putin into submission by threatening him with more sanctions. What we need is Trump, the master negotiator, to come in and wave his tiny fists around and then, boom! Peace in our time. Of course, Trump being Trump, he hasn't actually specified what these new super-duper sanctions would entail. Maybe he'll slap a tariff on Russian nesting dolls, or ban imports of borscht. Who knows? For all we know, he's planning to challenge Putin to a shirtless wrestling match, winner takes Ukraine. And let's not forget the most important element of any Trumpian proposal, the complete lack of details. Now let's talk about the other half of this unholy equation, Vladimir Putin, the former KGB agent with a penchant for poisoning his enemies and invading sovereign nations. Putin's rise to power has been marked by a series of aggressive moves, both domestically and internationally. From the annexation of Crimea to the ongoing conflict in eastern Ukraine, his actions have consistently demonstrated a willingness to use force to achieve his goals. What does Vlad the Invader make of Trump's bold proposal? Well, publicly, the Kremlin is keeping its cards close to its chest. Official statements are vague, offering little insight into Putin's true intentions. However, the lack of a clear response is telling in itself. But behind the scenes, you can bet your bottom ruble that Putin is laughing his head off. The idea of Trump brokering a peace deal is likely seen as a joke in the Kremlin's inner circles. Let's be clear, Putin has absolutely no interest in negotiating a peace deal, especially not one brokered by Donald Trump. His strategy has always been to project strength and exploit any perceived weakness in his adversaries. For one thing, he sees Trump as a weak, easily manipulated fool. The Helsinki summit was a clear example of this dynamic, where Trump appeared to side with Putin over his own intelligence agencies. Remember Helsinki? Yeah, good times. That summit was a diplomatic disaster for the US, but a win for Putin, who managed to further his narrative of Russian strength and American weakness. Secondly, and more importantly, Putin believes he's winning. Despite the economic sanctions and international condemnation, he has managed to maintain a strong grip on power and continue his military campaigns. Sure, the sanctions are hurting, and the Russian military has performed about as well as a one-legged man in an ass-kicking contest. The economic strain is evident, and the military setbacks are numerous. But none of that matters to Putin. His focus is on the long-term game, and he is willing to endure short-term pain for long-term gain. He's playing the long game, and he knows that time is on his side. With a strategic patience that has become his hallmark, Putin is betting that the West's resolve will wane before his does. And what about the Ukrainians, the actual victims in this whole sorry mess? Their lives have been turned upside down, their homes destroyed, and their futures uncertain. Where do they stand in all of this? They are caught in a geopolitical tug-of-war, with their very existence hanging in the balance. Well, they're understandably wary of any peace plan that involves ceding territory to an invading force. The scars of war run deep, and the idea of giving up land is not just a political issue, but a deeply personal one. Imagine for a second that Canada invaded the US, occupied a chunk of the Midwest, and then said, okay, let's call it a draw. You keep California, we'll take Iowa. It's an absurd scenario, but it helps illustrate the emotional and practical complexities involved. Would you be happy with that deal? Of course not. No nation would willingly accept such terms, and Ukraine is no different. President Zelensky has made it clear that he's not interested in any deal that compromises Ukraine's sovereignty. His stance is firm because he knows that any concession could set a dangerous precedent. He's willing to negotiate, but only on his terms. These terms are not just about land, they are about the future of Ukraine as a free and independent nation. And those terms include a full Russian withdrawal from all Ukrainian territory, including Crimea, which has been a point of contention for years, as well as security guarantees from the West to prevent future aggression. These guarantees are crucial for Ukraine to rebuild and move forward. Zelensky understands that peace without justice is a hollow victory. True peace must come with accountability and assurances that such aggression will not happen again. He's also acutely aware that any agreement would be impossible to enforce without the backing of a robust international peacekeeping force. This force would serve as a security blanket, ensuring that the terms of peace are upheld and that Ukraine can finally find some semblance of normalcy. Section 5, Squeezing Russia, the sanctions game. Have they bitten or just nipped? Now let's talk a bit more about those sanctions. Are they working? Well, the short answer is, kind of. The long answer is, it's complicated. There's no doubt that the sanctions have had a significant impact on the Russian economy. The ruble initially plummeted like a drunken pigeon, inflation skyrocketed, and foreign investment dried up faster than a puddle in the Sahara. But while the sanctions have undoubtedly caused pain, they haven't exactly brought Russia to its knees. The Russian economy, it turns out, is more resilient than many analysts initially predicted. Plus, Putin has been preparing for this moment for years, building up foreign currency reserves and cultivating alternative markets for Russian goods. The truth is, sanctions are a blunt instrument. They can take years, even decades to have their intended effect, and even then, there's no guarantee they'll work. Section 6, Whispers from Within. Is the bear fatigued? Shifting sands in the Kremlin. Meanwhile, back in Moscow, there are signs that the Kremlin may be preparing the Russian public for a less decisive victory than initially envisioned. Margarita Simonyan, the head of the state-controlled media outlet RT and a staunch Putin ally, recently suggested that a ceasefire along the current front line might be a realistic outcome. This, of course, is a far cry from the blitzkrieg that Putin had promised. This subtle shift in rhetoric suggests that the Kremlin might be feeling the heat. The sanctions are biting, the body bags are piling up, and the Russian people are growing increasingly restless. Putin, for all his bluster, is not invulnerable. He relies on a delicate balance of power, propped up by propaganda, repression, and the perception of invincibility. If that perception cracks, so too might his grip on power. Section 7. From NATO's obsolete to something? Trump's transatlantic tightrope walk. Now let's talk a bit about Trump's own evolving position on NATO. During his presidency, Trump famously called NATO obsolete and repeatedly threatened to withdraw the United States from the alliance. He also cozied up to Putin at every opportunity, praising him as a strong leader, and even accepting his denials of election interference over the assessment of his own intelligence agencies. However, since the start of the war in Ukraine, Trump has adopted a somewhat more hawkish stance, at least rhetorically. He's taken credit for arming Ukraine, a claim that is demonstrably false, and has even criticized Biden for not doing enough to support the Ukrainian war effort. Section 9. A world on edge. What next for Ukraine as peace remains elusive? So, where does that leave us? The war in Ukraine is a tragedy for all involved, a senseless conflict that has already claimed the lives of thousands of innocent people. The international community has a moral obligation to do everything in its power to bring the fighting to an end, and to hold Russia accountable for its aggression. But, as we've seen, there are no easy answers. The situation is complex, the stakes are high, and the players involved are often driven by their own self-interest. Until then, the people of Ukraine will continue to suffer, and the world will watch with bated breath, hoping against hope for a swift and just resolution to this horrific conflict. Please like and subscribe for more updates.